reputations of Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes.
Both of them were very intimidating and imposing individuals. They had a violent background. And when we'd go and interview people, everyone would pretty much try to avoid either having contact with us or they wouldn't tell us the straight story.
The task force believed that the only way to get to the drug boss and his enforcer would be through a cooperating witness. They needed to find someone who could give them first-hand information and perhaps solicit a taped confession.
He's a chump, man. I'm afraid of him. I got people on the street.
The investigator approached a confidential informant he had developed on earlier cases.
But if you need me to do something, I can have him.
The informant couldn't place Barnes with the victim,
He got a bad reputation. I'll take him down.
but he did know that the enforcer had a nephew who had recently been released from prison.
What's up, man? What's up, Clay? What's up, dude?
The nephew's name was Russell Barnes, known on the street as Ice.
The whole neighborhood's saying. Yeah, they moving folks out, man.
After leaving prison, he had come to St. Paul to begin dealing cocaine with contacts provided by his uncle, Jeffrey Barnes. The nephew was anxious to make money. Agents hoped to use his eagerness to their advantage. Investigators developed a new strategy in the fall of 1992. The enforcer's nephew would become their new target. FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy, a specialist in wire intercepts, was called in as part of the plan.
We went after Russell, number one, because he was a pretty good-sized dope dealer. And number two, he dealt with his uncle, Jeffrey, and we felt that if we could get a case made against Russell, that would help us make a case against Jeffrey.
To get him, agents would somehow have to infiltrate the closed ranks of a dangerous drug underworld. In 1992, investigators believed a St. Paul drug boss and his enforcer had killed Duan Walker. They had already recovered the murder weapon. But Sergeant Tom Donaski, assigned to an FBI drug task force, needed corroborating evidence in order to arrest drug boss Ken Jones and his enforcer Jeffrey Barnes.
Just having the weapon alone wasn't enough to get him prosecuted for it. We felt that we're going to have to identify some people or bring some people into court that'll be able to testify that Jeff Barnes and Ken Jones were involved, in the murder.
FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy believed that if they first arrested the enforcer's nephew, drug dealer Russell Barnes, he might provide the information they needed.
We had sources of information that were close to Russell that gave us the indication that he knew that his uncle had committed the murder. We didn't know to what extent that Russell knew about it.
To build a narcotics case against Russell Barnes, the FBI enlisted a trusted informant with credibility on the street.
And I can hear what I'm saying coming back through here. All right.
Agents wired the informant, who would engage in controlled drug buys with the enforcer's nephew. Task force members would record each buy. It was a risky operation. If the informant's wire was discovered, he would likely be killed. Agents wanted to build trust and avoid any possibility that Russell Barnes might suspect it was a setup.
What's up, Ice? Hey, bro. Chillin', baby, chillin'. What you need? What you want? What you need? Okay, all right. You want taste?
At first, the informant bought small amounts.
How much is it gonna cost me?
Over time, the transactions increased in size and frequency, and each was recorded.
Bags like this, right over top. Everything's everything.
But Russell Barnes refused to
All right, my
speak
brother,
about his
stay up.
knowledge of the murder.
Later.
Agents were no closer to solving the crime. The FBI needed to plant someone closer to the enforcer himself. In May of 1993, they discovered their way in. An informant working for the St. Paul FBI on another case mentioned that he and Jeffrey Barnes had done time together. He claimed they were very close and that Barnes trusted him. He said he was sure he could get Barnes to sell him cocaine and to talk about the Duane Walker murder.
So, you know Barnes really well.
Agents tested the informant's credibility by having him call the enforcer. Within moments, it became clear Jeffrey Barnes was comfortable talking to the informant.
No, I've been out a couple of months now.
I'm still in the business. You know me.
It was the break investigators were looking for.
I get you a good deal.
Now they needed to find a place for the drug buys, a controlled environment that could be adequately wired.
I've been eating well.
At the time, the informant was living with a relative and couldn't really do things at his home. We obtained a house from HUD and moved the informant into the house. And the informant agreed to record certain conversations that he might have with Jeffrey Barnes.
Investigators set the informant up in a government-owned house on the west side of St. Paul. He was to contact the FBI anytime the enforcer was planning to visit the house for a drug deal. FBI technicians wired the house with electronic listening devices in 3 rooms. Agents knew Barnes liked to boast about being a hitman, referring to himself as Murder Incorporated.
With that information, we tried to encourage the informant to try to bring him to a point where he would talk to him about, you know, acts of violence that he was involved in and things like that. And this is something that Jeff Barnes' reputation was all about, and it's something that he liked to brag about.
Agents coached their informant on how to draw Barnes out about the murder of Duane Walker.
Thank you, thank you.
He was to lead the enforcer into talking about the hits he had performed in the past.
Well, look, I don't want to take too much of your time.
In one tape conversation, the informant pretended he wanted Barnes to help him rob a drug dealer.
Let me go up there and rough him up a little bit.
Jeffrey Barnes suggested that they just kill him.
Murder?
Been a hitman a long time.
Barnes
Nothing to it.
told the informant that doing a hit on somebody is not a problem, and he described how he could do it.
It's all the same game.
He would walk up behind the individual, pop him in the head with a handgun, let him fall on the floor, wrap him in plastic, and drag his body outside and put it in an alley. And this was the exact same way that Duane Walker had been killed.
Don't want to take up too much of your time. Let's see if we get down to business. Don't stay in business long.
It was good circumstantial evidence, but by itself, it wasn't enough.
I got your money.
Because the buys had been arranged by telephone, investigators secured a warrant to tap the suspect's phone lines. Although the wire intercepts captured no information on the Walker murder, they did produce details of the drug operation. In January 1994, the task force decided it was time to arrest Russell Barnes and hope he would turn on his uncle. On January 29th, They set up another controlled drug buy with an informant. It would happen at a downtown St. Paul hotel. Investigators wired the room for sound.
You can go. Okay.
The reliability of the eavesdropping devices was essential.
Testing. 1, 2, 1, 2.
The recordings would be used in court. And agents would be monitoring from an adjacent room. If Russell Barnes discovered the setup, they would be able to protect their informant.
Okay, go ahead and give me a signal.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
When the room was ready, they would have the informant call the enforcer's nephew and order several ounces of cocaine.
Mary had a little lamb. Testing. 1. Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little
Investigators from St. Paul Police Special Investigations Unit were conducting the surveillance at Russell Barnes' residence, and after the phone calls were made, with very short delay, Russell went to the hotel.
Russell Barnes had delivered to the informant before.
Glad to see you came around, boy. I told you one day we'd be rolling like this. See what you need tonight.
He brought cocaine and the equipment he needed for measuring it.
Correct. Well, I knew what I had to do.
He suspected nothing.
Big time. Big time.
To him, it was just another deal.
2 keys. 2 keys.
He set up shop and began the transaction, unaware that every word was being recorded. It was important to get a drug dealer off the streets. But what agents really wanted was for Russell Barnes to give a statement about drug boss Ken Jones and enforcer Jeffrey Barnes committing murder.
You ready?
When details of the drug deal were on tape, investigators moved in.